Today we're going to look at Chapter 6. Skeletal system include supporting body structures and providing shape to the body, since the muscles connect to the bones. It also protects internal organs. Your ribs protect your lungs, and your skull protects your brain. Your vertebra protect your spinal cord. So bones are good at protecting you. It also allows movement, since muscles are attached to bones. So as bones are pulled by muscles, then the body moves. The bones themselves don't create the movement. And bones provide mineral storage, such as calcium and phosphate. And those are important to be stored since they're necessary in the blood. They also are used to make bones strong. Bone is important for hematopoiesis, also called hemopoiesis, which means the formation of blood, and that takes place in red bone marrow. Bone is a connective tissue. It's made of cells and matrix, just like all connective tissues are. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells. Bone matrix is made up of both an organic portion and an inorganic portion. The organic portion has collagen fibers. The inorganic portion is made up of mineral salts. So the mineral salts being phosphorus and calcium. And the minerals give bone its hardness, while the organic portion gives it flexibility and strength. Bones are formed as early as embryonic development. They start out mostly as a cartilage model, hyaline cartilage, and then are replaced by bone. Some remnants exist in the newborn, for instance, cartilage at the end of bones, in growth plates, and the fontanelles, which are soft spots on the baby's skull. This is where bone is still growing. We're going to also look at the structure of a long bone. One of the parts of a long bone is the diaphysis, which is the shaft of the bone. And if you look here, you'll see the shaft, the diaphysis, and you can also see the epiphysis, the end of the bone, and there's also another epiphysis down here. In the diaphysis is yellow bone marrow or fat, and in the epiphysis is where blood is produced. And you'll also notice there is a structure here between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. And when you are still growing, this is called the epiphyseal plate and is made of cartilage. And this allows growth in length. Another part is the inside of the bone is lined with a membrane, and that membrane is called the endosteum. And so we would have it inside here. And then there's a periosteum that covers the outside of the bone. And you see a piece pulled up here. It's the periosteum that allows growth in width during your entire lifetime. And the more you have force on the bone, the more that periosteum allows it to grow in width. You only grow in length as the epiphyseal plate expands, and once it becomes a line, you no longer grow in length. And in women, that usually occurs at the end of the teens, and in males into the 20s. The bone type we just looked at is a long bone. So long bones would be the bones of the arms and legs and the bones in the hands. Another type of bone is called a flat bone, and flat bones would be bones such as the sternum, bones in the skull and the ribs. Another type would be cube-shaped bones or short bones, and these are found at the ankle, in the tarsal region, it's really part of the foot, and the wrist, which is really the top of the hand. And another type would then be irregular bones, and irregular bones don't fit into any of the other categories. So your hip bone or your vertebra would be an example of an irregular bone. The frontal bone, which is the forehead, but actually comes up onto the skull, so it's yellow here. You can see a little of the sphenoid bone here from the side, but most of that's inside the skull. On top of the skull, there are two parietal bones. The temporal bone, and this actually encases the ear, your inner ear is here in this, but temporal means time, and so this would be kind of where you gray first, over on the side of your head. And also in the back, here's the occipital bone. You'll notice inside it's showing a little of the ethmoid bone here. Other bones include the bridge of the nose, which is the nasal bone, the sides of the nasal cavity, the inferior concha, the maxilla, which is the upper jaw, where your top teeth are. Lacrimal is on the inside of your eye socket, where your tear ducts are. And your palatine bone forms the hard palate in your mouth. If you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, you can feel your hard palate. And then the lower jawbone is the mandible. You'll want to look at these as you go through them, and you can use certain apps. There's an app called Whack a Bone, WHACK, a bone, and it is a kind of a game learning the bones of the body. So here are the bones. You can see in blue the axial skeleton, and in more of a tan color the appendicular skeleton, which means the upper and lower extremities and what holds those bones on. So the spinal column, or the vertebra, is a series of bones that are found along the midline of your back, and it's divided into 5 sections. The upper section has 7 vertebrae, and I always remember these sections as 7, 12, 5 for cervical, thoracic, lumbar, 7 in the morning to eat breakfast, noon for lunch, and 5 o'clock for dinner. So 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic vertebra, and 5 lumbar vertebra. The sacrum is made of fused bones, and so is the coccyx, or the tailbone. Inside of the vertebra is where your spinal cord is, and it's protected. A typical vertebra has 3 main parts. One part is called the spinous process, which you see here. There are 2 transverse processes, here, and then also a body, and this is where the discs are located between the vertebra. There's also a vertebral foramen, or hole, and this is where the spinal cord goes through. Notice that the different regions of the vertebra, cervical and thoracic and lumbar, look different in side section, and their spinous processes are shaped differently. The first 7 pair of ribs are true ribs. They attach by way of cartilage to the sternum. False ribs are pairs 8 through 12, and they need a long piece of cartilage to finally get them up to the bottom of the sternum. The last 2 pair of false ribs are what we call floating ribs, because they're not attached in the front at all. All of these ribs are attached to the thoracic vertebra in the back. The upper extremity is made of the shoulder girdle, the arm, wrist, and hand. The lower extremities include the hip girdle, legs, ankles, and feet. So the shoulder girdle you can see here is made of the collarbone, which we'll call the clavicle, and the scapula, or the shoulder blade. And they meet up here and connect. And then the humerus, this bone, is going to connect in to a portion of the scapula. The radius is the lower arm bone, and it's on the thumb side. And the ulna, also a lower arm bone, is found on the pinky side. There's different ways of remembering this. One is PU, pinky, ulna, and another is if you feel your radial pulse. It's on your thumb side here in your wrist. You can actually feel your pulse. So radial pulse, because the radius is there. The hand has phalanges. Phalanges are the finger bones, and there's 3 of those per finger, except for the thumb, which only has 2. And then the metacarpals are these bones here in the palm region. And then also there are carpals, which are your wrist bones. Really, though, these are in the hand. The ulna and the radius. The pelvic girdle is made up of 3 fused bones, the ilium, ischium, and pubis. The socket is the acetabulum, which is a deep socket for the head of the femur, and that is on the side of the pelvic girdle. So here is the acetabulum, ilium, ischium in the back, and also the pubis in the front. There's one foramen, one hole, called the obturator foramen, and a nerve called the obturator nerve goes through this. The lower extremity contains the femur, or thigh bone, the patella, which is the kneecap, and then a tibia, the larger bone, that is medial, and the lateral, and the fibula smaller, or you can remember little fib. Tarsals, which are these bones here, one of the tarsals you'll probably know already is the calcaneus, which is your heel bone. The metatarsals, there's 5, and then there's phalanges, and just like with the hand, there's 2 phalanges for the big toe and 3 phalanges for each toe after that. Now for joints, these are articulations between bones where 2 bones come into contact with each other. There are 3 kinds of joints. A diarthrosis is a freely movable joint. Most of the joints are this type. An amphiarthrosis is a partially movable joint, typically with cartilage, and a synarthrosis is an immovable joint. And typically the synarthroses, these immovable joints, have fibrous connective tissue between. The sutures of the skull would be examples of synarthroses. 4 common types of diarthroses, freely movable joints, are ball and socket joints that have the most movement, found at the hip and at the shoulder. Another type would be a hinge joint found at the elbow and also at the knee and the ankle. We also have a plain joint that is found, for instance, between the tarsal bones or between the carpal bones. That's all I'm going to do for now. I hope this helps to introduce you to the bones of the skeleton.